3 weeks ago, something happened in this war that barely made a ripple in the headlines. No breaking news banners, no dramatic footage looping on cable television, just a quiet report buried beneath the noise of daily battlefield updates. A Russian fighter jet went down inside Ukrainian-controlled territory. At first glance, that sounds unremarkable. Fighter jets get shot down in wars. It's tragic, it's costly, but it's routine. Aircraft explode, wreckage burns, investigators sift through twisted metal, and whatever secrets were on board vanish in fire and debris. But this crash was different. This jet didn't disintegrate. It didn't erupt into flames. It didn't scatter itself across a crater. It came down largely intact, one piece, electronics still powered, systems still alive. And in the next 48 hours, Ukraine didn't just recover a downed aircraft. They captured something far more valuable than a plane. They captured the brain. Inside that jet was the radar system that ties together Russia's air war, the nervous system linking fighter pilots, missile batteries, command centers, and early warning networks across the region. The intelligence value of what Ukraine obtained isn't measured in millions. It's measured in strategic advantage, operational exposure, and long-term consequences that could reshape how this war is fought in the sky. What makes this story extraordinary isn't just what Ukraine recovered, it's how they did it. This wasn't luck. This wasn't a random missile finding a lucky angle. This was preparation, deception, and timing executed with surgical precision. To understand why this matters, and why it may have quietly changed the balance of air power, you have to look beyond the wreckage and into the invisible battlefield of signals, data, and information. Because in modern warfare, the most decisive victories often happen long before anyone hears an explosion. To understand why this single aircraft mattered so much, you have to understand what it was and what it carried. The jet that went down wasn't an aging relic or a disposable workhorse. It was a Russian Su-35, Moscow's premier air superiority fighter, designed to dominate contested skies and keep enemy aircraft out of Russian-controlled airspace. On paper, the Su-35 is impressive. It's fast, maneuverable, and lethal. With a price tag of roughly $85 million, it already represents a major investment. But the airframe itself isn't what makes the Su-35 dangerous. Aluminum and engines can be replaced. Pilots can be retrained. The real value sits behind the cockpit. At the heart of the Su-35 is its radar system, the platform that allows the aircraft to see, track, and fight far beyond visual range. This radar doesn't just spot targets, it manages battles. It tracks dozens, sometimes hundreds of objects at once, filtering threats, prioritizing engagements, and feeding information into a much larger network. That network connects the fighter jet to ground-based missile systems, airborne early warning aircraft, and centralized command centers. Every scan, every lock, every missile launch becomes part of a shared picture of the battlefield. In practical terms, this radar acts as a hub, synchronizing Russia's air defenses in real time. That's why destroying a Su-35 usually destroys its value as an intelligence target. When a jet explodes, its electronics burn, memory chips fry, encryption keys disappear. Whatever secrets it carried die with it. But when a radar like this survives, powered, intact, still communicating, it becomes a window into the entire system behind it. And that's what makes what happened next so consequential. Here's the problem Ukraine faced, and it's a problem that borders on the impossible. You don't capture advanced military technology by blowing it out of the sky. Modern fighter jets are designed to fail violently. When they're hit, their electronics burn first, radar systems overload, data storage fries, and whatever intelligence value the aircraft once had disappears in seconds. If Ukraine wanted the secrets inside a Su-35, they couldn't destroy it. They had to bring it down alive. That requirement changes everything. It means no direct hits to the fuselage, no catastrophic explosions, no lucky missile strikes. It requires precision, not just in firepower, but in understanding how the aircraft, its systems, and its pilots behave under stress. Bringing down a modern fighter jet without destroying its avionics is almost unheard of unless you know exactly what you're doing. You have to blind the aircraft before you disable it. You have to overwhelm the pilot without giving him time to react or escape. And you have to do it in a narrow window, because the longer a jet stays airborne, the more chances it has to flee back under the protection of friendly air defenses. This wasn't something that could be improvised in the moment. Ukraine couldn't wait for an opportunity to appear and then act. They had to create the opportunity themselves. That meant studying the Su-35 not as a machine, but as part of a system, how it communicated, when it transmitted, and what invisible signals it gave off every time its radar powered on. Somewhere inside that constant background chatter of military communications was a weakness. Ukraine's task was to find it, isolate it, and turn it against the very aircraft it was meant to protect. And that work didn't begin the day the jet fell. It began weeks, possibly months earlier, long before anyone realized a trap was being built. What followed was not a strike, but a study. For weeks, Ukrainian intelligence units quietly watched Russian air activity without trying to interfere. They weren't hunting for dramatic shootdowns or quick wins. They were collecting patterns, small, boring details that only become valuable when stacked together over time. Every advanced fighter jet emits signals, not just when it fires weapons, but when it powers on, synchronizes systems, or checks in with command networks. To Russian commanders, this is routine background noise. To Ukrainian cyber and signals intelligence teams, it was a map waiting to be drawn. They began tracking Su-35 activity across multiple air bases, not just where the jets flew, but when, which aircraft launched at what hour, how long patrols lasted, which pilots flew which routes, fuel consumption, maintenance cycles, even subtle variations in how individual aircraft communicated with command systems. Slowly, a picture emerged. Among several Su-35s operating near the front lines, one aircraft stood out. It flew combat air patrols along a familiar corridor. Its missions followed a rhythm, predictable enough to model, flexible enough to look routine. Most importantly, at certain moments during those patrols, it drifted just beyond the protective umbrella of Russia's heavy ground-based air defenses. That gap was small, measured in minutes, sometimes seconds, but it existed, and Ukraine didn't rush to exploit it. Instead, they waited. They confirmed the pattern again and again, validating that this wasn't a coincidence or a one-off mistake. This Su-35 wasn't reckless. It was operating exactly as doctrine allowed, and that doctrine assumed the sky itself was safe. By the time Ukraine moved to the next phase, they weren't guessing. They knew when the aircraft would be airborne. They knew how Russian commanders would respond under pressure, and they knew exactly which lever to pull to force the jet into the open. The trap wasn't built around firepower. It was built around predictability and the quiet confidence of an adversary who believed his systems could not be deceived. The trap didn't begin with a missile. It began with noise. Just before dawn, Ukrainian forces launched a wave of low-cost attack drones toward Russian-controlled infrastructure, fuel depots, energy facilities, and power stations that Moscow could not afford to leave unprotected. These drones weren't fast. They weren't stealthy. They were loud, slow, and almost primitive by modern standards. That was intentional. Each drone cost a fraction of what Russia would spend to shoot it down. And Russian air defense commanders were immediately faced with a dilemma they had encountered many times before. Ignore the incoming drones and risk damage to critical infrastructure, or engage them and expend expensive interceptor missiles. They chose to engage. Surface-to-air missile batteries activated, radar systems lit up, interceptor missiles launched, each one costing hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars. From Russia's perspective, this was a routine defensive response. From Ukraine's perspective, it was exactly what they needed. Then came the second decision. As the drones continued pushing forward, Russian command ordered fighter aircraft into the air to reinforce the defenses. Two Su-35s scrambled. One of them was the aircraft Ukraine had been quietly studying for weeks. From the cockpit, nothing seemed unusual. Ukrainian drones had been intercepted countless times before. Slow targets, minimal risk, easy kills. The pilots moved forward, engaging one drone after another, confident in their radar picture and supported by what they believed was a secure defensive network behind them. But with every missile launch, something else was happening. Russian systems were broadcasting. Radar emissions intensified. Engagement patterns revealed themselves. Locations, timing, response protocols, all of it was being recorded, logged, and fed into Ukrainian systems waiting patiently for this exact moment. As the Su-35s chased the last of the decoy drones, they crossed an invisible line. They moved beyond the protective range of ground-based air defenses. The sky ahead looked clear. The mission looked routine. And that's when the real operation began. Hidden far below the flight path, tucked into valleys, tree lines, and terrain that Russian sensors barely noticed, Ukraine launched the second wave. This time, more than 60 drones lifted into the air simultaneously. But these weren't attack drones. They carried no explosives. Their mission wasn't to destroy the Su-35, it was to blind it. Using the exact frequencies Ukrainian intelligence had mapped over weeks of monitoring, these drones began flooding the Su-35's radar system with false data, not random noise, but carefully crafted signals designed to look real. On the pilot's display, the world started to unravel. What had been a handful of slow-moving drones suddenly became chaos. Dozens of fast targets appeared and disappeared. Fighter jets seemed to materialize out of nowhere. Missiles tracked from impossible angles. Threat indicators multiplied faster than the pilot could process them. The radar, worth tens of millions of dollars and built to manage over 100 targets at once, began to choke. Locks dropped. Error warnings flashed. False returns crowded out real ones. The system wasn't destroyed, it was overwhelmed. Inside the cockpit, the pilot wasn't fighting aircraft anymore. He was fighting ghosts. He banked hard, tried to reacquire targets, burned fuel chasing signatures that didn't exist. Every maneuver made the situation worse, and while his attention was consumed by the digital chaos flooding his screens, he never saw the real threat approaching. A Ukrainian F-16 was already closing in, flying dark, radar silent, guided by external surveillance platforms positioned safely beyond Russian reach. At the critical moment, targeting data was passed to the pilot. He locked on and fired a single missile. This wasn't a kill shot. The missile detonated just above the Su-35's spine. Hydraulic lines were severed. Control surfaces froze. The fly-by-wire system went offline. The jet didn't explode. It became a powerless glider. Seconds later, it slammed belly first into a muddy field. The pilot ejected and survived. And sitting in Ukrainian-controlled territory, largely intact and still powered, was the prize they had spent weeks preparing to capture. The moment the Su-35 hit the ground, the clock started ticking. Russian command understood immediately what had just happened. This wasn't just a lost aircraft, it was a potential intelligence catastrophe. Inside that fuselage was a radar system still warm, still powered, still capable of exposing how Russia sees and fights in the air. The order went out fast and without ambiguity: destroy it. Bombers were scrambled, artillery units were redirected, missiles were retasked toward the crash site. Russia wasn't trying to recover the jet. They were trying to erase it before Ukraine could touch it, but Ukraine was already moving. Less than 3 minutes after impact, a heavy transport vehicle, normally used to haul armored vehicles, emerged from concealment. Ukrainian special forces secured the site with practiced efficiency. Cutting equipment went to work immediately, slicing through wings and control surfaces to reduce the aircraft's profile. Winches engaged. The fuselage was dragged onto the flatbed as Russian munitions began landing dangerously close. Some strikes fell within 100 meters. Ukraine had planned for this too. Drones released dense aerosol clouds over the recovery zone, disrupting laser guidance and targeting systems. Air defense units activated, creating a protective bubble as the transport accelerated away from the crash site under fire. One Russian bomber attempting to strike the recovery area never made it back. Inside the moving trailer, something even more remarkable was happening. Ukrainian technicians weren't waiting to reach a secure facility. They connected a fiber optic cable directly into the Su-35's avionics while it was still being transported. The radar was still transmitting its routine signal back toward Russian command. Ukraine didn't shut it down. They listened. By allowing the system to keep talking, Ukraine gained access not just to the aircraft, but to the network behind it. Every handshake, every synchronization ping, every encrypted exchange revealed how Russian air assets and ground defenses communicated in real time. What Russia saw as a liability to be eliminated became, in Ukrainian hands, a live intelligence feed, one that would soon ripple far beyond the muddy field where the jet had fallen. The true damage from this operation didn't show up in wreckage photos or casualty counts. It unfolded quietly across command centers, air bases, and pilot briefings in the days that followed. By monitoring the Su-35's active radar links, Ukraine gained a rare look into the architecture of Russia's air war. They mapped the locations of air bases with precision. They identified maintenance cycles across entire squadrons. They observed how fighters, missile batteries, and command centers coordinated in real time. Just as importantly, they discovered weaknesses, points where communication protocols were brittle, predictable, or vulnerable to manipulation. Russia felt the shock almost immediately. Within 72 hours, multiple Su-35 squadrons were grounded, not because they were damaged, but because Russian commanders no longer trusted their own systems. Frequencies had to be changed, encryption standards rewritten, operational procedures overhauled. Weeks of air operations were disrupted, not by bombs, but by uncertainty. The economics of the operation tell an even starker story. Ukraine's total cost, decoy drones, electronic warfare platforms, a single missile, and recovery equipment came in under $1 million. Russia lost an $85 million fighter, at least one bomber during the recovery attempt, dozens of interceptor missiles, and the strategic integrity of its air defense network. The real cost is measured in billions, but the most profound impact may be psychological. Russian pilots now know their radar can lie to them. They know that what appears on their screens might not be real. That hesitation, just a fraction of a second, can be fatal in air combat, and that kind of doubt can't be patched with software. This operation marks a shift in how wars are won, not by who has more aircraft, but by who understands systems better, not by overwhelming firepower, but by controlling information. In the 21st century, the most powerful weapon isn't a missile or a jet. It's the ability to see clearly and to make your enemy see ghosts. As this first year of economic confrontation comes to a close, one truth stands out above everything else. Donald Trump didn't just misjudge a trade partner.